Eric Klein. I'm happy to introduce the new Bloom effects on the Cycles viewport preview window and also for final render. This is a feature that Eevee users have enjoyed for quite a while. And now it's available in K-Cycles. It's quite easy to dynamically interact with the viewport to do quick adjustments in quality of bloom. And all the settings that are designed for the bloom in K-Cycles have worked pretty effective in many types of scenes with bloom. And the bloom effect works with the optics preview window, denoiser. And final render does not need any denoiser. It's whatever settings you have for final render would work fine. The bloom effect will be done before compositor if you have any compositor nodes working. And so let's get started. So let's start with this basic scene, and the bloom options are under K-Cycles, and then you'll see a bloom checkbox and a drop down with all the options. So let's go into the render preview viewport for Cycles, and as you can see we have viewport and automatic, which it's in this case optics. So as you start, obviously we have K-Cycle starting and we have not selected bloom. We can select bloom now, and as you can see right away bloom shows up. The typical default settings are, I usually have them at 1.5, usually starts at a size of 8. So basically threshold is the level of brightness where the bloom effect is going to take effect. And you can see that later on with the blend option. Blend option is the amount of bloom effect that gets blended into the scene. Size is pretty obvious, means the size of the bloom that spreads out from the source. Intensity is how bright the bloom effect is. Color, it tints the bloom. And clamp, it's the maximum intensity that a bloom can have. So if you have multiple bloom sources, light sources in your scene, it'll clamp it to the level of intensity that you've set up as a maximum. So the default usually start with a threshold of 1, so anything less than 1 would be not part of the bloom. To see what's in bloom and not, the best way is to have the blend of 1, which means it only shows the bloom effect only. And so now we can see that let's turn off overlay so we can just focus only on the scene itself. So this is the areas that are basically have a brightness above 1. If I lower the threshold to something like 0.1, as you can see more parts show up. And this is quite scene dependent on your light sources, and if you have it 0.01, basically almost everything is part of the bloom effect. So the goal here is to set a threshold high enough so only the areas that have light sources that you want to have the bloom effect show up. The other ones you want to have them in darkness, so the bloom effect does not create any distortions. So as you can see here, we have a pretty good level of threshold. It's basically only the light sources emissions here are in some of the high reflections are only showing. The rest is in dark, so that's a pretty good setting for the blend. We can go back to 0.5 and see the look. If you want to have a little bit wider spread on the bloom, you can go to the maximum size of 9, and right away it changes. You can also quickly zoom into an image. Once you zoom, the sampling starts counting again, so the zoom will, but you cannot see. It's quite easy to interact with the viewport and change some settings. Here I can just say I want to have a color tint of red. All I have to do is select this, and you can see now the bloom is spread out as a red effect. So intensity, I think, is pretty much self-described. If you want to have a high intensity, you can go up to, let's say, 5. It creates a higher effect on intensity for the bloom. And once you've adjusted your bloom settings the way you are happy with, we can hit final render. And as you can see now, we created a bloom effect quite easily with this first scene. For this second scene, we're going to use a very popular BMW scene. On this scene, I've already made sure that the compositing is off. So we're going to just set up the bloom effect for the BMW scene using K-Cycles bloom. So we'll go in the preview window. And now that we have the preview rendering working, we haven't turned on bloom yet. So in this case, I want to focus on the light, so I'll probably zoom the image into the lights so I can look at more details. And let's turn it on. So as you can see right away, we saw the headlights coming up. Let's look at the blend first to see if we need to make any adjustments on the threshold. Yeah, as you can see, we have a lot of parts of the car body that should not be part of the bloom. So let's increase the threshold to something like 2. Yeah, that looks like it's, for the most part, we've only have the areas of the headlights that are going to be part of the bloom. We can turn off the overlays, and as you can see, it really, that's a pretty good level for thresholds. If we want to have a little bit brighter or size, we can go up to 9. And let's go back to the 0.5 blend, which is the midpoint of blending the bloom into the scene. And here I like to also maybe zoom in a little bit closer, and I like to probably put some tint, like a blue tint light on it. There you have some of that, maybe a little bit stronger. Maybe too blue. Okay, so you select a certain amount of bluish tint for the light, and I think we have a good setting on the headlights. So normally, if you look at the overlays, you can see that basically the bloom is affected. Once it's finished, the sampling rate, the bloom shows up, and then at that point you can easily change the settings, and the changes basically become immediate. Right? Like size to 2, back to 9, So now that we finished with the bloom settings, all you have to do is just hit final render. And now we added the bloom for the headlights. For the last scene, we're going to be using one of the demo scenes from the Blender Foundation, Splash Fox. So let's go to the preview render, and we can turn this on. These are relatively heavy scenes, so it takes a little bit to pre-process the objects initializing. So okay, so now we've already have our scene. Now enable bloom, and instantly we get the bloom effect. And here let's look at, let's see where the thresholds have been affecting the scene to see if one is a good level or not. Yeah, I think that's a good level. Size, I maybe like to make it a little bit more dynamic. Let's go to 9. You can see it's definitely gets a stronger bloom. Let's see how it looks once it gets blended back into the scene, the bloom. I think it's a good effect, but I think the tint is a little too red for that. I want to maybe tone it down with a complementary color of a greenish color. There you go. I think that blends a little bit better with the yellow of the source image. And I think we can maybe increase the intensity, maybe a little stronger, 1.5. There we go. So that's basically it, and we're ready for a final render. This is definitely a little bit more pre-processing on this scene, but once it starts rendering, it should come up pretty quickly. So obviously, once you get familiar with the settings, it becomes pretty quick to adjust the settings. And here we have the bloom created. It looks quite nice. So the key thing is basically for blooms, at least to get good quality bloom, is basically adjust your threshold to a good level and use the blend to 1 to kind of confirm what areas of the scene are in bloom. Size is depending on how much effect you want to have. Same thing with intensity. And then color is good to have a tint that complements your scene or your emission source of lights. Okay, I hope you enjoy this quick introductory to K-Cycles Bloom.